The Rosewood Grill didn't look like a place where lives changed. It sat on the corner of Demon Street and a narrow side road in Nashville, Tennessee, wedged between a dry cleaner that had been closing for 3 years and a barber shop whose neon sign buzzed like a dying insect every night after 9. The restaurant's facade was painted a deep burgundy that had faded to something closer to rust under years of Tennessee summers. A hand-painted wooden sign above the door. Rosewood Grill, Est. 1987, swung gently in the October breeze, its chain creaking with the patient resignation of something that had seen too many seasons to be surprised by anything. Inside, the Rosewood Grill smelled like yesterday's gravy and fresh coffee and the specific kind of lemon, cleaner that soaks into wooden floors over decades until it becomes part of the wood itself. The booths along the left wall were upholstered in cracked vinyl, once red, now a faded pink, and each table had a small glass vase with a plastic yellow flower that fooled nobody but offended nobody either. The lighting was warm and slightly dim, the kind of lighting that made everyone look a little kinder than they probably were. It was 9:47 on a Tuesday morning in October, and the restaurant wouldn't open until 11. Danny Calloway moved between the tables with the quiet efficiency of a man who had performed the same motion so many times they no longer required thought. He was 34 years old, lean in the way that comes not from vanity, but from rarely having enough time to sit down and eat a full meal. His dark brown hair was slightly too long at the collar, not out of style, but out of the simple fact that a haircut was $14 and $14 was a tank of gas or 3 days of Tyler's school lunch money, and the math always worked out the same way. He wore the Rosewood uniform, black pants, white button-down, a burgundy apron that matched the restaurant's exterior, and moved with the particular grace of someone completely comfortable in a space most people only pass through. This was Danny's world. He knew every scratch on every table. He knew that the third booth from the door leaned slightly left and needed a folded napkin under one leg. He knew that the corner table by the window got direct sunlight between 10:15 and 10:40 every morning, and that if you didn't lower the shade, the early lunch customers complained about the glare. He knew this place the way you only know somewhere you've spent more hours than you've spent sleeping. Danny wiped down the surface of table 7 with a damp cloth, rinsing it in the bucket at his feet, then straightening the vase with its plastic yellow flower, centering it with a small automatic adjustment of his fingers. He moved to table 8, then 9. The rhythm was so embedded in his muscle memory that his mind was free to drift, and this morning it drifted, as it sometimes did on quiet October mornings, to his father. Robert Calloway had been a man of few words and considerable feeling. He'd driven a delivery truck for 31 years across Middle Tennessee, always had a country station playing on the radio, and possessed the specific quality of certain men of that generation, the ability to communicate everything important through gesture and silence and the occasional song. He'd never been to a concert in his life, never owned anything more sophisticated than a portable CD player. But he knew the words to what felt like every country song ever recorded, and he sang them constantly, in the truck, in the shower, in the kitchen on Sunday mornings when he made pancakes and the radio was turned up just loud enough to fill the house without waking the neighbors. Robert Calloway had died 4 years ago, a Tuesday in February, a heart that simply decided it was done without consulting anyone. Danny had gotten the call during a lunch shift right here in this restaurant, and he had finished the shift because he didn't know what else to do. And because Tyler was only 8 and needed to eat that night regardless of what had happened, and because grief, Danny had learned early, was not an excuse the world accepted for failing to show up. He was wiping table 11 when it happened. It started without intention, the way those things always do. His mind was on his father, on Sunday mornings, on the smell of pancakes and the radio turned low. And somewhere between the thought and the act, the song simply arrived in his throat and came out. I was watching you from across the room. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, the sound a man makes when he's not performing but simply existing inside something. He moved to table 12, cloth circling the surface in slow arcs. You were with someone new, he had eyes only for you. His voice was a low baritone with a natural warmth to it, slightly rough at the edges the way good country voices tend to be. Not the polished smoothness of a pop singer, but something earthier. Something that sounded like it came from a real place rather than a recording booth. He didn't notice he was singing. That was the thing about it. He had no audience, no awareness of himself as a performer. He was simply a man cleaning tables thinking about his father, and the song was just the way the feeling came out. You look so good in love. The words came fully now, soft but clear, filling the empty restaurant the way morning light fills an empty room gradually, without announcement, until suddenly you realize it's everywhere. Danny Calloway had not always been a waiter. The truth of his life, the version he didn't tell people, went like this. At 19, he'd been the most promising young singer in his graduating class at Hillwood High School. The kid every teacher pointed to when parents asked whether Nashville dreams were still possible. He had a voice that made people stop talking. Not a trick voice, not a technically impressive voice in the way that won high school talent competitions, though it won those too. But a voice that carried something in it, something that landed in your chest rather than your ears and stayed there. At 20, he'd moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other aspiring musicians and started making the rounds of Nashville's open mic circuit. At 21, he'd gotten 2 meetings with minor label representatives, both of which ended with the same gentle, devastating phrase, "Great voice, needs development, keep at it." At 22, he'd recorded a 4-song demo that cost him $1,800 he didn't have, borrowed from his father over his mother's objections, and sent to 47 labels, managers, and booking agents. 31 didn't respond. 12 sent form rejections. 4 sent personal rejections that were somehow worse. At 23, he'd met Janet Holbrook at a Tuesday night open mic at the Bluebird Cafe. She was there with girlfriends, laughing too loudly at the table nearest the small stage. And she'd gone quiet when Danny started singing. Genuinely quiet, the way people go quiet when something catches them off guard. They'd talked until closing. They'd married 18 months later in a small ceremony at a park in Bellevue with 40 guests and a borrowed ring that they later replaced with a proper one when the money existed for about 3 months before it stopped existing again. Tyler Robert Calloway had been born on a Thursday in April when Danny was 26, and Danny had held him in the delivery room and felt something reorganize inside his chest, some fundamental shifting of priorities that was both terrifying and clarifying at once. The demo fund became the diaper fund. The rehearsal nights became the overnight shift nights. The dream didn't die so much as it got set down, gently, in a corner, with the sincere intention of picking it back up soon. Soon became later, later became someday. Someday became the specific silence of a man who no longer talked about what he used to want. Janet had left when Tyler was 4. Not dramatically. There was no affair, no catastrophic fight, no single breaking point. There was simply the long erosion of 2 people who had married the idea of each other and found the reality more demanding than either had anticipated. She moved to Atlanta, remarried a software engineer named Craig who had a house with a pool and a stable salary, and saw Tyler every other Christmas and for 2 weeks in the summer. She was not a villain. She was just absent, and in Danny's life, absent and villain had become difficult to distinguish. So it had been Danny and Tyler for 8 years now, in a 2-bedroom apartment on Nolensville Pike with thin walls and a parking lot view, and a landlord named Harold Webb, who was not unkind but was absolutely punctual about the first of the month. Danny worked the morning and early lunch shift at Rosewood from 8 to 3, picked Tyler up from school or made sure he got to the after-school program, helped with homework, made dinner, and was asleep by 10 because the alarm went off at 6:15 and the bus didn't wait. It was a good life, Danny would tell you if you asked. He meant it. He had learned to mean it. He just sometimes, in the empty restaurant before 11, sang his father's songs to the tables. You look so good in love. He was on his second pass through the chorus, voice still low but looser now, more open, when he heard the sound from the hallway. Not a footstep exactly, more like the particular absence of movement, the way a room changes when someone in it stops what they're doing. Danny stopped singing instantly. The silence that replaced his voice felt enormous. He turned toward the hallway that connected the dining room to the back offices and the private entrance, the hallway that led to the small room Mr. Patterson used for meetings he didn't want to conduct in the open restaurant. The hallway was dim, lit only by the light bleeding in from the dining room and a single overhead fixture that had needed a new bulb for 3 weeks. Danny could see the shape of someone standing at the far end of it, just inside the threshold where the hallway opened to the corridor leading to the back door. The figure was tall, wore a light jacket, and had on a hat. The hat was the specific kind of hat, a pale gray felt, resistal with a modest crease and a straight brim that in Nashville communicated certain things, immediately and unmistakably to anyone who paid attention. Danny stood very still with his cloth in one hand and his empty bucket in the other, and his brain worked through the available information with the slowness of someone who already knows the answer but needs a moment to accept it. The figure moved into the slightly better light of the dining room doorway. Danny Calloway felt the world rearrange itself in a single second. George Strait looked at him across the empty restaurant. He was older than the album covers, naturally, 72 now, his face carrying the specific weathering of a life lived in honest light. But the eyes were the same as they'd always been in every photograph, every television appearance, every concert footage clip Danny had watched as a teenager, calm, direct, and containing within them the particular quality of a man who had seen enough of the world to be neither easily impressed nor easily cynical. He wore dark jeans, a collared shirt under the jacket, and the resistal low enough that it shaded the upper part of his face slightly. He was looking directly at Danny, and he was smiling, not the practiced smile of a public figure managing a public moment, something smaller than that, and therefore larger. The smile of someone who has just heard something that genuinely pleased them and hasn't yet decided what to do about it. Danny's mouth opened. Nothing came out. George Strait tilted his head slightly to the side, a gesture so small it might have been nothing, but in the context of everything, felt like a full sentence. "Don't stop on my account," he said. His voice was exactly what it was on every record. Low and unhurried, the particular cadence of a man from Partite, Texas, who had never once in his life felt the need to perform his own identity. Danny stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then the bucket fell out of his hand. It hit the hardwood floor with a hollow clang that rang through the empty restaurant and sent a small wave of soapy water across the boards near table 11. And Danny watched it roll and settle and thought, with the strange clarity of shock, that he was going to need to mop that before 11. George Strait looked at the bucket, then back at Danny. Then he laughed, a short, genuine sound, and stepped fully into the dining room. "I'm sorry," Danny said, which was the first thing that came out of his mouth and was not. He immediately recognized the ideal opening for what George Strait said. For Danny gestured vaguely at the room, the song, the bucket, his entire existence, all of it. George Strait crossed the dining room with the unhurried stride of a man who had performed for stadiums and found neither the crowd nor the emptiness particularly intimidating. He stopped at table 10, the one Danny had just cleaned, and rested one hand on the back of a chair, looking at Danny with the same calm attention. "You work here?" he said. "Yes, sir." "How long?" "6 years." George Strait nodded, taking this in with the same gravity he might give any piece of important information. "And you sing like that every morning?" Danny felt something hot climb his neck. I I didn't know anyone was. I know you didn't. George Strait said it simply, without edge. That's why it was worth hearing. Danny didn't know what to do with that sentence. He stood holding his damp cloth and tried to find a reasonable response and found nothing. That's one of my favorite songs, George Strait said, written for me, as it happens. Have to say I don't usually hear it sung that way. What way? Danny asked before he could stop himself. George Strait considered for a moment, like it cost something to sing it. The restaurant was very quiet. From the kitchen, Danny could hear the distant sound of the cook, Bobby, arriving, the back door, the clank of the prep station, the low murmur of the radio Bobby kept at the grill. The October light was beginning to come through the front windows, the particular gold of a Tennessee morning that made everything look briefly like it was painted. What's your name? George Strait asked. Danny. Danny Calloway. Danny. He said it like he was confirming it for some internal record. You been singing long? And here it was, the question that landed differently than it should have. Because the honest answer to have you been singing long was not just yes, but was the entire architecture of Danny's adult life. The decisions and surrenders and the specific weight of standing in this restaurant for 6 years, cleaning tables and paying rent and picking Tyler up from school. The weight of being 34 and knowing exactly what you were and what you were not. Used to, Danny said. George Strait looked at him steadily. What happened? Danny almost said life because that was the answer people gave. And it was even mostly true. But something about the directness of the question, the way it was asked without pity or condescension, just as a straightforward inquiry from someone who genuinely wanted to know, made him answer with something closer to the truth. I had reasons, Danny said. George Strait nodded. He pulled the chair from table 10 and sat down, in the way of someone who has decided a conversation is worth having properly. Tell me one of them, he said. Danny Calloway did not sit down. There was still the bucket to deal with. The floors to finish. Bobby was in the kitchen, and Mr. Patterson would arrive at 10:30, but he found himself talking anyway, standing with the cloth in his hand because the alternative was telling George Strait that he needed to get back to work, and that was not a thing his brain would allow him to say. He told him about the demos, about the 47 letters, about Tyler being born and the priorities shifting. He didn't tell him about Janet. Some things were not for strangers, even extraordinary ones, but he said he'd been raising his son alone, and he said it the way he always said it, which was as a fact rather than a bid for sympathy. George Strait listened with the focused patience of a man who was in no hurry and wanted to be nowhere else. He asked 2 or 3 questions. How old is your son now? What happened with the demos? Do you still play? And the questions were precise and quiet, and each one pulled more out of Danny than the last one. I have a guitar, Danny admitted. At home. I play sometimes after Tyler's in bed. Nothing serious. What's nothing serious? George Strait said. Just playing. For myself, not going anywhere with it. Music doesn't have to go anywhere to matter, George Strait said. Then after a pause, but sometimes it should. Danny looked at him. I want to do something, George Strait said, and there was no preamble to it, no build-up. Just the sentence arriving in the air between them with the same plain directness as everything else he said. And I want to be clear that this isn't charity, because charity isn't what you need, and it's not what I'm offering. Danny waited. I'm doing a private event here Friday evening. A dinner, benefit for a children's hospital foundation, about 200 people. Private room, invited guests. He paused. The act I had lined up had to cancel this morning. Family emergency. That's why I'm here, meeting with the owner, about logistics. He looked at Danny. I want you to do a 2-song set before I come on. The world stopped moving. I want you to sing that song, George Strait said, and one other of your choice, in front of people who know music. And then I want to see what happens. Danny opened his mouth. Before you say no, George Strait said, and there was something in his voice now, not hardness, but a kind of gentle insistence. I want you to think about the fact that you just sang that song to an empty restaurant because you couldn't keep it in. Think about what that means. Danny thought about the bucket. He thought about Tyler, at school right now in his third period math class, knowing nothing about this. He thought about his father in the delivery truck, radio on, singing to the highway. "I'm a waiter," Danny said. "Right now," George Strait said. "You are." The morning light was fully in the windows now, and the plastic yellow flower on table 9 caught a slant of it, and for a brief, absurd moment, it almost looked real. "Friday's my shift," Danny said. "I'll talk to Patterson," George Strait said. Danny looked at him for a long time. "Yes or no, Danny?" George Strait said gently. "That's all it is." Danny Calloway looked down at the damp cloth in his hand. He looked at the spill on the floor near table 11 that he still needed to mop. He looked at the plastic yellow flower catching the morning light. "Yes," he said. The first person Danny told was Bobby. Not because Bobby Reed was his closest friend, though in the practical mathematics of Danny's life, limited as it was to the geography of the restaurant, his apartment, Tyler's school, and the occasional trip to the Kroger on Thompson Lane, Bobby qualified simply by proximity. Bobby was 48, a large man who moved around the Rosewood kitchen with surprising delicacy. A 20-year veteran of restaurant cooking who'd never wanted to be a chef in any formal sense and was suspicious of the word. He made good food. He knew how to make it consistently. That was the job, and he did the job. Bobby was at the grill when Danny came back through the kitchen door, face carrying something Bobby read immediately as unusual. "You look like you either got fired or won something," Bobby said without looking up from the prep board. "George Strait was just in the dining room," Danny said. Bobby looked up. "He heard me singing," Danny said, "and he wants me to perform Friday at the benefit dinner." Bobby stared at him for a long moment. George Strait. The George Strait. Yes. King of Country George Strait. Yes, Bobby. Bobby set down his knife. "And you said yes." "I said yes." Bobby looked at him for another full 3 seconds. Then he pointed at him with one large index finger and said with absolute conviction, "Don't you dare say no later." "I already said yes." "People say yes and then talk themselves out of it," Bobby said. "I'm telling you right now, if you come back in here and tell me you called him and canceled, I will personally—" "I'm not canceling." "Good." Bobby picked his knife back up, then set it down again. "Danny, yeah. You're the best singer I've ever heard in my real, actual life, not on a record, in real life." He said it the way Bobby said most things, without sentimentality. As a matter of established fact, the same way he'd tell you the burgers needed another minute on the grill. "I've been telling you that for 4 years. I know you have, and you always change the subject." "I know I do." Bobby nodded. "Don't change the subject on Friday." Mr. Patterson arrived at 10:30, as he always did, in the slightly rumpled business casual of a man who had been running the same restaurant for 19 years and had long ago made peace with the fact that slightly rumpled was his permanent aesthetic. Gerald Patterson was 61, white-haired, with reading glasses perpetually pushed up onto his forehead, and a manner of speaking that moved slowly and meant everything it said. He found Danny restocking the condiment station near the host stand and stopped, looking at him with the expression of a man who has something to say and is choosing his opening. "George Strait spoke to me," he said. Danny straightened up. "Yes, sir. He tells me he'd like you to open Friday's event." Patterson studied him over the pushed-up glasses. He paused, choosing quite emphatic about it. Danny nodded. "I told him I had no objection," Patterson said. "And I'd give you Friday evening covered." He paused again. "Danny, how long have you been working here?" 6 years. "In 6 years, I've heard you singing in this room," maybe Patterson thought about it, 8, 10 times. "Always before open. Always when you thought you were alone." He looked at him steadily. "I never said anything because it seemed private, but I heard it." Danny wasn't sure what to do with this information. "You should have told me sooner," Patterson said. "That you could do that." "I'm a waiter," Danny said. Patterson made a short sound that might have been a laugh. "You know what George Strait said to me just now in that back office?" Danny shook his head. He said, "Gerald, that man in your dining room is either the most humble person I've met in 30 years in this business, or the saddest. I can't tell which yet." Patterson let that sit in the air for a moment. I think he meant it as a compliment to the first option, and a concern about the second. Danny was quiet. "You have a son," Patterson said. "Tyler?" "Yes, sir." 12 now?" 12, yes. "Is there anything you need me to do for Friday?" "Practically speaking." He said it in the efficient, unsentimental way of someone offering real help rather than emotional performance. "Logistics. Time. I can have someone cover your afternoon prep entirely." "I think I'm all right," Danny said. "You think, or you are?" "I'll let you know." Patterson nodded, pushed his glasses back down onto his nose, and walked toward his office. At the door, he stopped and turned back. "Danny, for what it's worth." He looked at him over the glasses. It was worth hearing. It was always worth hearing. He went into his office and closed the door, and Danny stood at the condiment station in the empty dining room with a handful of ketchup bottles and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt seen. It was not entirely a comfortable feeling. He picked Tyler up from school at 3:15, which meant leaving during the lull between lunch and the early dinner crowd. A gap Patterson had always been flexible about because Danny made up the time and then some. Tyler came through the school doors in the specific way of 12-year-old boys, backpack hanging off one shoulder, headphones around his neck, 3 or 4 steps ahead of the pace he needed to be going. Tyler Calloway was 12 and looked like his mother in the structure of his face, the same particular set of the jaw, the same dark eyes, but moved like Danny, with that same quiet deliberateness. And when he was thinking about something, he tilted his head slightly to the left in a way that had been Robert Calloway's gesture before it was Danny's, and was now Tyler's. A small physical inheritance passed through without anyone noticing. He saw Danny's truck and changed direction without breaking stride, pulling the door open and climbing in with the efficiency of routine. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Danny said. "Good day." "Math test was probably fine," Tyler said, which was his standard answer when the test had actually gone well, but he wasn't willing to commit to optimism yet. He pulled his seatbelt on. "You okay? You look weird." Danny pulled out of the school lot, buying himself a moment. He'd been thinking about how to say this all afternoon. "Something happened this morning," he said. Tyler looked at him. Danny told him. He told it plainly, the way he told Tyler most things, without drama, without softening, with the specific respect for a 12-year-old's intelligence that had always been Danny's instinct as a parent. Tyler listened without interrupting, which was his way, watching Danny's profile in the way he had of waiting for the complete picture before he responded. When Danny finished, Tyler was quiet for a moment. "George Strait," he said. "Yes, the country singer." "Yes, the one Grandpa used to play." Danny's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "Yeah, that one." Tyler was quiet again for a block and a half. Then, "Are you going to do it?" I told him yes. Tyler nodded, looking out the window at the passing street. "Good," he said. "Yeah, Dad?" Tyler turned to look at him, and there was something in his expression, a 12-year-old trying to hold a feeling he didn't quite have the language for yet, that made Danny's chest ache in the specific way only Tyler could make it ache. "I hear you playing at night, after you think I'm asleep." Danny said nothing. "You're really good," Tyler said. "I've always thought you were really good." He turned back to the window. "You should do it." They drove the rest of the way home in a silence that wasn't empty. That evening, Danny Calloway took his guitar out from the closet in his room, a Taylor 110E that he'd bought used 8 years ago. One of the few things from his musical life that had survived every financial difficulty, every move, every practical reason to sell it, and sat on the edge of his bed and played. Not quietly, not the muffled picking of a man trying not to be heard. He played properly for the first time in longer than he could calculate, and sang the song from the beginning all the way through twice. From down the hall he heard Tyler's door open, then footsteps to the end of the hall, and then silence, which meant Tyler was sitting at the end of the hall on the floor, back against the wall, listening. Danny kept playing. The next 2 days were not what Danny expected. He had imagined in a vague way that the conversation with George Strait would remain private until Friday, that it was the kind of thing that happened quietly, between two people, and played out that way. He had not considered that Bobby Reed, cook and keeper of No Secrets, would mention it to Diane Kowalski, the Wednesday lunch waitress, who would mention it to her husband, who would post about it on a neighborhood Facebook group with the subject line, "Local Rosewood waiter to open for George Strait Friday. Does anyone know this guy?" By Wednesday afternoon, Danny's phone had 43 notifications from a Facebook group he had not known he was in. By Thursday morning, a reporter from the Nashville Tennessean had called the restaurant. Mr. Patterson handled it with the measured calm of a man who had watched 19 years of minor dramas unfold and had learned to neither accelerate nor suppress them. He confirmed only that there would be a private benefit event Friday evening and that George Strait would be performing, which was already public. He said nothing about Danny. But the neighborhood group had names and names had faces. And by Thursday afternoon, there were people Danny hadn't spoken to in years texting him, old classmates, former co-workers, 2 people he'd gone to open mics with 15 years ago who had somehow found him and sent messages that all, in different words, said some version of, "I always knew it." Danny sat in his apartment Thursday night, Tyler doing homework at the kitchen table, and looked at his phone and felt the specific nausea of a man who has spent years building careful walls and just watched someone walk through them as though they were made of paper. "You're doing that thing where you go quiet," Tyler said without looking up from his homework. "What thing?" "The thing where something's wrong but you don't want to say so." Danny set his phone face down on the table. "I'm fine." "You're nervous," Tyler said, and said it without judgment, just as an observation, the way he stated most things. "I haven't performed in front of people in 11 years, Danny said. Tyler looked up from his homework. "How'd it go the last time?" Danny thought about it. The last time had been a small venue on 2nd Avenue, a Thursday night, about 60 people. He'd played 4 songs. The response had been good, genuinely good, and he'd driven home afterward thinking, this is still possible, this is still real. And then Jana had been awake when he got home, and there'd been the specific conversation that happened too often in those days. And the feeling from the venue had slowly drained out of him over the following days like air from a tire that has almost but not quite been punctured. "It went well," he said. "Then Friday will go well too," Tyler said, with the absolute confidence of someone who has not yet been taught to doubt, and returned to his homework. Danny looked at his son for a long moment. Then he picked his guitar up off the couch and started practicing. There is a specific kind of quiet that lives in a person who has stopped speaking about something important. It isn't the quiet of peace or resolution. It isn't even the quiet of acceptance, not entirely. It's something closer to the quiet of a room where a sound used to happen, a presence defined by its absence, a shape in the air where something used to be. Danny Calloway had lived inside that quiet for so long that he had come to mistake it for his natural state. He was a quiet man. Quay moved quietly, spoke quietly, took up precisely the amount of space he needed, and no more. People who knew him thought of this as his character. What it actually was practice. He had learned to be quiet the way you learn anything, through repetition, through necessity, through the gradual discovery that making yourself small was the most reliable way to avoid the particular pain of making yourself large and finding out that large wasn't wanted. This is not to say Danny Calloway was unhappy. He was not, or not in the sweeping, operatic sense the word sometimes implies. He was the specific kind of person who finds genuine meaning in small things, in the satisfaction of a well-made cup of coffee, in Tyler's laugh, in the particular quality of the first cool morning of October after a long Tennessee summer, and he was honest enough with himself to know that these things mattered and were real. His life was real. His love for Tyler was as real as anything he'd ever felt. But there was a shelf in the back of the room where he kept the other thing, and sometimes in the mornings in the empty restaurant before 11, the shelf made itself known. Thursday evening, while Tyler slept, Danny sat at the kitchen table and opened the drawer where he kept the things he didn't look at. It wasn't much. People imagine these things as more dramatic than they are, a drawer full of dreams. What it actually contained was a manila envelope with 4 printed rejection letters. He'd thrown the rest away. But these 4 had felt important to keep, for reasons he'd never fully articulated. A photograph of himself at 22 on a small stage at the Bluebird, taken by his father on a disposable camera, slightly blurry. The original handwritten lyric sheet for a song he'd written at 23 called 30 Miles of Nothing that the label representative he'd met with had said was genuinely impressive before passing on it, and a business card from a man named Richard Dalton, A&R representative, who had given it to him at an industry event in 2012 and said to call any time, and whom Danny had called twice and who had not called back. He looked at these items the way you look at evidence. What had stopped him wasn't the rejections. He understood now, with the perspective of a man who had watched the industry for another decade from the outside, that rejections at 22 were not verdicts, that most of the people who ended up with actual careers in music had been rejected dozens of times, that the label gatekeepers of 2012 had been wrong about everything they'd been confident about, that the industry had restructured entirely since then in ways that made the barriers he'd faced essentially obsolete. He understood all of that. What had stopped him was Janet, or rather, to be fair to her, and Danny tried to be fair to her. For Tyler's sake, and for his own, what had stopped him was the combination of Janet and money, and the particular timing that put becoming a father in the same year that his confidence was already at its lowest, and the way those things together had created a weight that he'd simply found easier to set down than to carry. What he hadn't understood until recently was that he'd been carrying it anyway. He put the contents back in the envelope and closed the drawer. Then he took the guitar from the corner and played 30 Miles of Nothing for the first time in 11 years, from memory, because he had never forgotten a single word of it. It was, he thought, still a pretty good song. Friday arrived with the indifference of days that don't know they're significant. Danny dropped Tyler at school a Friday, which meant Tyler's backpack was slightly lighter and his mood was fractionally better, and drove to the restaurant for the morning shift with the specific sensation of a man carrying something heavy inside his chest that he couldn't set down and couldn't show. The morning shift was busy, which helped. The lunch rush came in at 11:30 and lasted until 1, and during those 90 minutes Danny was fully occupied with the clean mechanics of the job, orders, timing, the beacon forth with Bobby through the kitchen pass, the particular management of Table 4, a family with a toddler who was conducting what appeared to be an experimental study of how much food could be applied to a restaurant floor and table. 2 women who had clearly not seen each other in years and needed 3 refills and a shared dessert, and made Danny think, briefly, of the specific warmth of reconnection. At 1:30, the rush tapered. At 2, Diane Kowalski arrived for the afternoon shift, and Danny was officially off. He stood in the parking lot beside his truck in the October afternoon and realized he had nothing to do until the event at 7. 5 hours. He had not thought about 5 hours. He drove to his apartment, practiced for an hour. The 2 songs he'd chosen, You Look So Good in Love, the obvious choice, the one that had started all of this, and 30 Miles of Nothing, his own song, the one from the drawer, the one nobody had ever heard him perform. This was perhaps the most consequential decision he'd made, and he'd made it in the middle of the night on Wednesday, without fully examining it, and now, practicing it in the afternoon light of his apartment living room, He sat with the question of whether it was the right call. The practical case against it was clear. He was opening for George Strait in front of 200 people who knew country music, and choosing to sing an original song that had never been performed publicly was either brave or foolish, and the difference was entirely in the execution. The practical case for it was simpler. It was the truest thing he had. If this was a moment, and increasingly, despite every instinct he had to minimize and contain it, he was being forced to accept that it might be a moment, then it should contain something true. He played it through 4 times. Then he put the guitar down and called Tyler's school to confirm pickup arrangements with the after-school program coordinator, Mrs. Patricia Flynn, who had been managing after-school logistics for the children of Nashville working parents for 14 years, and had heard every kind of complication and took it all in stride. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "Tyler's fine. He'll be here until 6. Take your time." "Thank you," Danny said. "And Mr. Calloway?" A brief pause. "My sister-in-law is going to that dinner tonight. She told me about you." Another pause. "Good luck. Though from what I hear, you won't need it." Danny thanked her again and hung up and sat on his couch in the afternoon light and thought about his father. He thought about Robert Calloway in the delivery truck on a Tuesday morning on I-40 radio on Singing to the Highway with nobody listening. He thought about the specific joy of that, the joy that needed no audience, that was self-contained and complete and real, regardless of whether anybody knew about it. He thought about the Bluebird that Thursday night, 60 people going quiet when he started. He thought about Tyler sitting in the hall listening to him play. He thought about You Look So Good in Love filling an empty restaurant, and a man in a resistal hat stopping in a hallway. He showered. He put on the best clothes he owned, dark jeans, a collared western cut shirt in dark blue that he'd bought 3 years ago for a wedding, and worn twice, his good boots. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for longer than he usually did. He looked, he thought, like a man getting ready for something. He wasn't sure when that had started to feel like a true thing. The event was in the Rosewoods' private dining room, a space Danny had helped set up dozens of times for private events and had never once stood in as anything other than the staff. It held about 200 people at round tables with a small raised stage at one end that was used for speeches and occasional live music. Tonight it had been transformed. White tablecloths, actual floral centerpieces rather than plastic ones. Professional lighting that gave the whole room a warm gold quality, like the inside of a good memory. Danny arrived at 6:15, well before the guests. Mr. Patterson met him at the back entrance and walked him through the logistics. He would go on at 7:45, introduce himself briefly, play his 2 songs, and then the MC would introduce George Strait. The sound technician, a young man named Carl Webb, who shook Danny's hand with professional efficiency and immediately began adjusting the microphone. Stan ran a brief sound check at 6:30. Danny stood at the microphone in the empty room, Carl at the soundboard, and sang 30 seconds of You Look So Good in Love into the professional audio system. The sound of his voice, amplified and full, and filling the empty room, surprised him. It sounded real. It sounded like a thing that belonged in a room like this. "Good," Carl said from the soundboard. "Really good, actually." He said it with the distracted efficiency of someone assessing technical output, and somehow the absence of performance in it made it more convincing than an enthusiastic compliment would have. At 7, the guests began arriving. Danny watched from a position near the kitchen corridor as they filled the room. 200 people in the specific register of well-heeled. Nashville. Industry people. Philanthropists, a scattering of local politicians. The kind of people for whom a benefit dinner at this price point was a social event rather than a financial stretch. They moved and laughed and greeted each other with the ease of people accustomed to rooms like this. And Danny watched them and felt the gap between his world and this one like a physical thing. Then he stopped watching. Not because it helped him to stop, but because he made a deliberate decision in the kitchen corridor at 7:15 on a Friday evening in October. He was going to do this. He had already decided. There was no more deciding to be done. What was left was only the doing of it, and the doing of it was something he knew how to do, had always known how to do, had simply spent 11 years pretending otherwise. He found a quiet corner near the back kitchen entrance and played his guitar softly. Not enough for anyone to hear, just enough to keep his fingers warm and his mind in the music. At 7:30, someone appeared beside him. He looked up. George Strait stood in the kitchen corridor in a dark jacket and his pale gray resistal, unhurried as always, and looked at Danny with the same direct calm he'd had on Tuesday morning. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Honest answer or good answer?" Danny said. George Strait smiled slightly. "You're already doing it, right?" he said. "You answered like a person instead of a performer." He glanced toward the dining room where the sound of 200 conversations filled the air. 2 songs. Tell the truth in both of them, that's the whole job. "The second song is original," Danny said. "I never performed it publicly before." George Strait looked at him. "When did you write it?" 11 years ago. A beat of silence. "Then it's been waiting long enough," George Strait said. He moved toward the stage entrance without further ceremony, and Danny watched him go and thought, "All right then." At 7:43, the MC, a woman named Beverly Hartwell, who ran the Children's Hospital Foundation, with the smooth efficiency of someone born to organize rooms full of people, stepped to the microphone, quieted the room with 2 light taps, and said, "Before our headliner tonight, we have a very special addition to our program, a Nashville original. Please welcome Danny Calloway." The applause was polite. The applause of 200 people who didn't know who Danny Calloway was and were extending the courtesy of welcome. He walked from the kitchen corridor to the stage stairs with his Taylor guitar and climbed them with the calm of someone who had made the decision and was now simply executing it. He stood at the microphone. 200 faces looked at him. The lighting was warm and he couldn't see individual expressions clearly. They were a collective presence, a massive attention directed at him, which was either terrifying or useful depending on what you did with it. He adjusted the microphone stand, settled the guitar, looked out at the room. "My name's Danny Calloway," he said. "I'm a waiter here at the Rosewood. Have been for 6 years." He said it plainly, with no apology and no irony. "Most of you don't know me. That's all right." He positioned his fingers on the guitar strings. "This first song is one I've known since I was a kid. My dad used to sing it in his truck. He passed 4 years ago, and I think about him every time I play it. He didn't say anything else. He just started playing. The first chord filled the room, and then his voice came in and the room changed. Not dramatically, this wasn't the movies. There was no single moment where every conversation stopped and jaws dropped. It was more gradual than that, more real. Table by table, the residual murmur of 200 people settling into a performance quieted, not because they were being politely attentive, but because something in the room had gotten their actual attention. The way a conversation can stop, not because of a loud sound, but because of a significant one. "I was watching you from across the room." His voice in this room, through this sound system, with these acoustics, was something different from what it was in an empty restaurant at 10 in the morning. It was the same voice, the same warmth, the same roughness at the edges, the same quality of costing something to produce, but the room gave it space, and the space gave it weight. And the weight was the thing that crossed the distance between a stage and a seat, and made it real to the people sitting in those seats. "You look so good in love." He played the full song. He played it the way he'd played it Tuesday morning, without performance, without showmanship, with only the honest application of everything he felt about his father and music, and the specific ache of loving something you've kept at a distance for too long. His eyes moved across the room without fixing on any single point, not the studied eye contact of a trained performer, just the natural way a person looks around when they're telling a truth and want to make sure it's landing. When the last chord faded, there was a half second of silence. Then the applause came, and it was not polite applause. It was the specific kind of applause that means people were moved and are responding to the feeling rather than the performance. Louder than courtesy required, sustained, punctuated with a few sharp sounds that might have been isolated table slaps. Danny stood at the microphone and received it and didn't know what to do with his face, which was perhaps the most honest thing about the moment. He adjusted the microphone slightly, let the applause settle. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate that." He looked down at his guitar for a moment, then back up. "The second song is something I wrote about 11 years ago. It's never been performed publicly before tonight." A brief pause. "I wrote it when I was trying to decide whether to keep going or stop. I stopped. The song didn't. The room was very quiet. This is called 30 Miles of Nothing." He had written 30 Miles of Nothing at 23 on a Tuesday night after a rejection call. Sitting in the apartment on Sylvan Park, with Janet asleep in the bedroom and the city quiet outside, and a guitar in his hands, and nowhere to put the feeling except into it. It was about a specific kind of American loneliness, the loneliness of the in-between place. The stretch between where you came from and where you're going. The long flat miles of Tennessee highway where the radio fades and doesn't pick up anything new yet, and you're just driving through the static, keeping your hands on the wheel, and trusting that eventually the signal comes back in. It was not, he had realized when he played it in his apartment Thursday night, a young man's song anymore. It was a 34-year-old man's song now, with 12 years of additional weight in it. 12 years of specific knowledge about what the static sounds like when it goes on for a long time. He played the opening figure, a finger-picked pattern in open D, unhurried, slightly lonesome, and then began. "There's 30 miles of nothing between here and the next good thing. Radio's gone quiet and the mile markers keep moving. I left something back there that I meant to bring. But the road doesn't stop for the things you left behind you." The room was absolutely still. Not the polite stillness of an audience being courteous. The stillness of people who have heard something that recognizes them, who are sitting in a room being sung to and feeling, specifically and privately, that the song knows something about their own life that they haven't fully said out loud. 30 miles of nothing, and I'm counting everyone. Trying to remember what it felt like to know where I was going. The sky is big and patient, and the highway just goes on. And somewhere out there's a place where the signal starts showing. Danny was not, in this moment, performing. He was not even particularly aware of the room. He was inside the song, inside the feeling that had made the song in the first place, which had not gone anywhere in 11 years, which had simply been waiting in a drawer with 4 rejection letters and a blurry photograph of a stage. "I'm not lost, I'm just between things. I'm not done. I just stopped knowing how to start. There's a difference between giving up and giving time, and I'm learning which one lives inside my heart." At table 12, he would find out later, a woman named Gloria Chun, the Hospital Foundation's executive director, had put her hand over her mouth. Beside her, her husband, a record industry veteran named James Chun, who had been in Nashville for 30 years and had heard approximately everything, had gone very still in his seat and was looking at the stage with the focused attention of a man doing rapid internal calculations. At table 7, 2 women who worked in the foundation's fundraising office and had come because it was a work event and not because they were particularly interested in country music, were both sitting forward in their chairs in the specific way of people who have been unexpectedly caught by something. At the kitchen corridor entrance, Bobby Reed had come out in his cook's whites and was standing against the wall with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the specific way of a man who is not going to allow himself to cry in a room full of people, but is working very hard at it. And in the wings of the stage, just off to the left in the position Danny couldn't see from where he stood, George Strait was listening with his hat in his hands. 30 miles of nothing, and then the first light shows. And the radio comes back in on a song you used to know. And you remember why you started, and you remember where you're going. And the 30 miles of nothing start to feel like part of the road, the final chord. The room held its breath for one full second, then it came apart. The applause was not what it had been after the first song. It was louder and less organized, the kind of response that happens when people aren't thinking about clapping, but are simply releasing something. The accumulated pressure of a feeling that needs to go somewhere. Several people were standing. He counted 5, 6, 7 people on their feet before he stopped counting because his vision had done something strange and the room was slightly unclear. He stood at the microphone and breathed. Beverly Hartwell was already moving toward the stage, her expression containing something she was professionally managing but hadn't fully contained. She mounted the steps and came to the microphone and said close to his ear, "Stay there a moment," and then turned to the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, Danny Calloway," she said into the microphone. The applause swelled again. Danny stood on a stage in Nashville, Tennessee, in the restaurant where he'd worked for 6 years, in the building he'd entered through the back door for 6 years, and received the sound of 200 people telling him that something they'd heard had mattered to them. He thought about Tyler. He thought about his father. He thought about the drawer. He looked out at the room through slightly unclear eyes and did not try to look like the moment wasn't affecting him, because the entire reason any of this had happened was that he'd stopped performing feelings he didn't have. He pressed his lips together, nodded once. "Thank you," he said into the microphone, and meant it with every specific weight of everything he'd just been thinking about. He walked off the stage. George Strait was in the wing. He looked at Danny as he came off the stage, and he'd said nothing for a moment, just looked at him with the same direct assessment he'd had on Tuesday morning, as though checking something against an internal measurement. Then he extended his hand. Danny shook it. "The second song," George Strait said. "That's yours." "Yes, sir. You have more." Danny thought about it. "Some. Good." George Strait nodded once. "Then, you've got a decision to make, Danny. Not tonight, but soon. I want you to think about something." He looked at him directly. "The thing that stopped you before, is it still real?" Danny thought about the drawer, about the specific weight of the rejection letters, about Janet, about the $1,800 borrowed from his father, about the 47 unanswered envelopes. He thought about Tyler sitting in the hallway listening. He thought about the moment this morning when he'd looked in the mirror and seen a man getting ready for something. "No," he said, "it's not still real." George Strait nodded. "Then think about what is." He put his hat on and walked up the stage stairs. And a moment later, Danny heard Beverly Hartwell say into the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the King of Country, George Strait." And the room erupted in a way that redefined every previous use of the word applause Danny had witnessed that evening. Danny sat on the stairs at the base of the stage wing and listened to George Strait perform. He did not watch from the crowd. He didn't go back to the kitchen. He sat on the stairs in the wing with his guitar across his knees and listened to a man who had spent 50 years doing the thing with complete honesty and extraordinary discipline. And he let the music do what music does when you stop trying to manage your relationship to it. He thought about a lot of things. He thought about the next morning, 6:15 alarm, the bus, Tyler's lunch, the rosewood, the tables, the bucket, Bobby at the grill, the plastic yellow flowers. He thought about all of it and felt, for the first time in a long time, that those things and the other thing were not opposites. That a man could be a father and a waiter, and also be the person who had just stood on a stage and done that. That these things were not in competition. That he had spent 11 years believing the dream required the surrender of the life, and the life required the surrender of the dream. And that this belief was simply wrong, not noble, not practical, just wrong. George Strait was singing Oceanfront Property, and the crowd was singing along. And Danny sat on the stairs in the wing, and for the first time in 11 years, felt the specific relief of a man who has stopped arguing with himself. After the event, Danny found James Chun waiting near the kitchen corridor. James Chun was 60, trim, with the specific, unhurried quality of a man who had spent 30 years in an industry that ran on chaos and had learned to move against the current of it. He had a business card already in his hand, which told Danny he had decided what he wanted to say before he came over. "James Chun," he said. "I've been in Nashville for 30 years. A&R, production, management." He handed Danny the card. "That second song is the best original I've heard performed live in this city in the last 5 years. That includes people who are signed." Danny looked at the card. "I'm not offering you anything tonight," James Chun said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not that guy, and tonight's not that night." He looked at him steadily. "What I'm offering is a conversation. Next week, my office. No pressure, no performance, just to talk about what you have and what it might mean." Danny held the card. "You'd be starting late," James Chun said. 34 is not 22. The industry is different than it was. There are no guarantees, there never were, and anyone who tells you different is lying." He paused. "But what you did up there tonight is real, and real is the only thing that lasts." Danny looked at the card for a long moment. Then he looked at James Chun. "I have a 12-year-old son," he said. "I know," James Chun said. "Pattison told me." "That's not an obstacle, that's a reason." He glanced briefly away and then back. "The best songs come from people who have something to protect." Danny put the card in his shirt pocket. "I'll call," he said. James Chun nodded once, the nod of a man who believed him, and moved back toward the dining room. Danny found Bobby in the kitchen back at the prep station, moving with the specific, deliberate efficiency of a man who has been crying and has decided the best response is to act as though he was doing something productive the entire time. "Bobby," Danny said. "Don't," Bobby said without looking up. "I'm not saying anything." "Good." Bobby scraped something from the prep board that didn't need scraping. "How'd it go?" "You were there," Danny said. "I saw you by the door." "I was checking on inventory," Bobby said. "You were crying." "I had something in my eye." "Both eyes?" Bobby finally looked up, and his expression was the expression of a man who has run out of deflection and has arrived at the actual feeling. It was not comfortable. Bobby was not a man who wore feelings icily in public. "You were incredible," he said, and said it the way he said things, as a factual statement, as something established and not up for debate. "You've always been incredible. I've been telling you that for 4 years. He pointed at Danny. "Don't ever put that guitar back in the closet." Danny almost smiled. "I won't, promise me. I promise." Bobby looked at him for a moment longer, then nodded and returned to his prep board with the air of a man who has said what needed to be said and is done with emotional exposure for the evening. Danny picked Tyler up from the after-school program at 6, which meant he'd been there for 3 hours past normal pickup, and Tyler came through the door with his backpack and his headphones, and stopped when he saw Danny's face. Kids know. They know before you say anything. They read it in the face, in the posture, in the specific quality of a parent's presence when something has shifted. Tyler stopped 4 feet away and looked at his father, and what he saw made him go still in the particular way he went still when something mattered. "How was it?" he said. Danny looked at his son. 12 years old, dark eyes, his mother's jaw, his grandfather's way of tilting his head to the left when he was thinking. The specific small human being who had reorganized everything important in Danny's chest on a Thursday in April, 8 years ago, and had continued to do so every single day since. "It was good," Danny said. Tyler looked at him a moment longer. "Just good?" Danny thought about the room going still for 30 miles of nothing. He thought about the applause. He thought about James Chun's business card in his shirt pocket. He thought about George Strait in the wings saying, "The thing that stopped you before, is it still real?" "It was the best night I've had in a very long time," Danny said. Tyler nodded slowly, taking this in with the seriousness it deserved. Then something in his expression shifted, the careful assessment giving way to something younger and less guarded. The 12-year-old underneath the 12-year-old's attempt at composure. "I knew it would be," he said. He walked past Danny toward the truck with the one-shoulder backpack stride of a kid who has something to feel good about and is trying not to show how much. Danny watched him go and felt the familiar ache that wasn't really an ache, the feeling that was too large to name properly, the one that had lived in his chest since the delivery room and hadn't left. He followed his son to the truck. 3 weeks later, Danny Calloway sat in the office of James's Chun on Music Row and had the conversation. It was a Tuesday, different from every other Tuesday in recent memory, by virtue of the fact that Danny had taken a personal day from the Rosewood for the first time in his 6 years there, a fact that had required a brief negotiation with his own psychology before he allowed himself to do it. Mr. Patterson had approved it without comment, which told Danny that Patterson already knew something about where this was going, and had elected to be supportive rather than demonstrate any visible reaction to losing his best morning shift waiter. James Chun's office was on the second floor of a building on Music Row that was unassuming from the outside and contained, within, the specific organized density of a working industry professional, gold and platinum records on the walls. Not ostentatiously arranged, but simply present the way tools are present in a workshop. A desk that bore the evidence of active work rather than performance of importance. 2 comfortable chairs across from it. A window that looked out onto the row's characteristic mix of the historical and the commercial. Simply present the way tools are present in a workshop. A desk that bore the evidence of active work rather than performance of importance. 2 comfortable chairs across from it. A window that looked out onto the row's characteristic mix of the historical and the commercial. James Chun sat across from Danny with a legal pad and a coffee and the same unhurried directness he'd had at the Rosewood. And for an hour and 15 minutes, they talked. They talked about Danny's history, the demos, the rejections, the 11 years. James Chun listened to this without either minimizing it or dramatizing it, which Danny found more respectful than either response would have been. They talked about the songs Danny had. He'd written 9 original songs over the years, scattered across various notebooks and voice memos, never organized into anything. They talked about the industry as it currently existed, its specific demands and realities, the economics of a streaming era, and what that meant for a 34-year-old artist without an existing audience and with a 12-year-old at home and a restaurant job. "I'm not going to tell you this is simple," James Chun said, "because it isn't. You're starting a decade behind where you'd be if you'd kept going. That's a real thing." He looked at Danny directly. "What it isn't is disqualifying. The question isn't your age. The question is whether what you have is strong enough to cut through the noise. And based on what I heard Friday night, I believe the answer is yes." He outlined what he was proposing, which was not a record deal. He was careful and explicit about this, but a development arrangement. A period of 6 months in which Danny would work with a producer Chun trusted to record a 5-song EP, while James Chun made targeted introductions to the people he thought needed to hear the material. There was money involved, modest but real. There was no pressure toward a particular timeline. There were no guarantees beyond the honesty of effort from both sides. "And your restaurant job," James Chun said at the end. "I'm not asking you to quit it. Not yet. Not until there's a reason to." Danny looked at the legal pad where James Chun had made notes, the small, organized marks of a man who had done this enough times to know which details mattered. "Why me?" Danny asked. It wasn't false modesty. It was a real question, the question of a man who has spent 11 years learning not to take up more space than he was certain he deserved. James Chun looked at him steadily. "Because you sang an original song to a room full of people who had never heard it, and you made every single one of them feel like it was about their life." He paused. "That's not a skill I can manufacture. It either exists or it doesn't." He looked at Danny. "It exists in you. It has apparently existed in you for a very long time, and it's tired of being in a drawer. Danny sat with that for a moment, then he said, "All right." He drove home from Music Row on a Tuesday afternoon in November and stopped at Tyler's school on the way, because he wanted to pick him up himself today, rather than have him take the bus, because some days required that specific grounding, the sight of his kid coming through school doors. Backpack askew, headphones around his neck, being alive and 12, and Tyler got in the truck and looked at him. "How was it?" he said. "We're going to make a record," Danny said. Tyler was very still for a moment. Then he said, "Like a real record? An EP first, 5 songs." Danny pulled out of the school lot. "It's going to take time. It might not go anywhere beyond that. I'm being honest with you." "I know," Tyler said. "I'm still going to be working at the Rosewood for a while. Things don't change overnight." "I know, Dad, but it's real," Danny said. "It's actually happening." Tyler was quiet for the length of 2 blocks, looking out at the passing street with the left-tilted head of his grandfather, thinking the way he thought, fully, without hurry, without the need to fill the silence with something premature. Then he said, "Can I hear the songs? Before the record?" "You've already heard most of them," Danny said. "Through the Wall?" Tyler made a sound that might have been a laugh, suppressed. "The one about the highway," he said. "That's my favorite." "I know," Danny said. "Mine too." The recording took place over 3 months on weekends and evenings, in a studio on Wedgwood Avenue run by a producer named Kevin Hartley. 30s, methodical, the kind of man who made you feel that every technical decision was considered and every artistic choice was yours. He and Danny developed a working relationship built on the shared language of people who care about the same things and have different areas of expertise. The specific productive tension of collaboration done right. Danny would finish his morning shift at the Rosewood, drive home, pick Tyler up or arrange his afternoon, make dinner, help with homework, and then on studio nights drop Tyler at the apartment of his neighbor, Mrs. Carol Jennings, 71, retired school teacher, who had watched Tyler since he was 6 and regarded him with the fond exasperation of someone who has stopped pretending children are anything but wonderful and inconvenient, and drive to Wedgwood. He would be home by midnight. 6:15 alarm. The cycle continued. It was hard. It was the specific hard of doing 2 things fully and refusing to do either one partially, which meant that for 3 months, Danny Calloway ran on less sleep than was advisable, and more purpose than he'd had in 11 years. And the combination was exhausting and clarifying in roughly equal measure. Tyler, who understood more than a 12-year-old was supposed to understand, never once complained about the arrangement. He did his homework. He was at Mrs. Jennings's when he was supposed to be. He asked Danny, on the mornings after studio nights, how it had gone, always with the same particular seriousness, the same genuine investment in the answer that told Danny his son was not performing interest but feeling it. "Sounding good?" he'd ask over breakfast. "Sounding real?" Danny would answer. Tyler would nod as though real was the only standard that mattered, which was, Danny had come to believe, actually true. The EP was called 30 Miles. 5 songs, the title track, 2 other originals that had lived in notebooks for years. A cover of a Don Williams song that Kevin Hartley said was the most honest cover he'd ever recorded with anyone. And 1 new song Danny wrote in January, in the kitchen at 2 in the morning while Tyler slept and the apartment was cold and quiet, a song about a 12-year-old boy sitting in a hallway listening through a wall, which was the most specific and personal thing he had ever committed to a recording, and which Kevin Hartley heard on the first playback and said nothing for a full minute, and then said, "That one is the record." James Chun sent the EP to 7 people. 4 responded within a week. Danny didn't become famous. That is the honest version of this story, and it's important to say so, because the version where a waiter sings a song and a country legend hears it, and 6 months later, waiters on stadium stages, is a different kind of story, a satisfying kind, a symmetrical kind, but not this kind. What happened was more gradual and more real. The EP generated industry attention, genuine, specific attention from people who knew what they were hearing. A small independent label in Nashville, Blue Ridge Records, offered Danny a development deal in March. Not a major label, not a radio-ready machine, but a real operation with people who understood what he was and weren't trying to make him something else. The first single from 30 Miles, the title track, was released in May. It didn't chart. It found, through the specific slow burn of streaming and sharing and the occasional appearance on a carefully curated playlist, about 40,000 listeners in its first month, which is not nothing, and which in the specific landscape of independent country music in 2026 represented something real and buildable. A booking agent named Reed Colton, 29, hungry, with a specific talent for identifying artists before they were ready for big rooms and getting them in front of the audiences that would make them ready, called in April and proposed a touring plan. Small venues, the right rooms, the listening room circuit that ran through Tennessee and Kentucky and the Carolinas and reached the people who sat down and paid attention. Danny's first show under his own name was at the Listening Room Caf on 4th Avenue in Nashville on a Thursday night in April, 120 seats. He sold it out, not because he was famous, because James Chun knew Beverly Hartwell, who knew everyone in Nashville's philanthropic and cultural community, and because Bobby Reed had told every single person who had eaten at the Rosewood in the previous 6 months, and because word of mouth in Nashville, a city that is, beneath all its industry architecture, still a small town built around people who care about music, travels in the specific organic way of things that are genuinely worth talking about. Tyler was in the front row. He'd asked if he could come, which meant he'd asked formally, with the seriousness of someone who understood this was not casual, who understood that front row of a real show was different from sitting in the hallway outside a bedroom. Danny had said yes and bought him a ticket, because Tyler deserved a ticket like everyone else, because this was Tyler's night as much as anyone's. Danny stood in the wing of the Listening Room Caf, a small, proper wing, proper stage, proper lighting, and heard the murmur of 120 people who had come on a Thursday night to hear someone they mostly didn't know yet. He thought about the drawer. He thought about the 47 envelopes. He thought about Janet, somewhere in Atlanta, living her parallel life, unaware that any of this was happening, and he thought about that without bitterness, genuinely, because the bitterness had gone somewhere in the last 6 months, and he wasn't certain where, only that it had quietly vacated. He thought about Robert Calloway in the delivery truck, radio on, singing to the highway. He thought about a Tuesday morning in October, a restaurant, an empty room, a bucket falling on a hardwood floor. He thought about a man in a pale gray resistal standing at the end of a hallway. George Strait had sent a text which Danny had stared at for approximately 4 minutes before accepting that it was real the day the EP was released. It had said, "Heard it. You kept what was real. Good luck, Danny." 3 sentences. No performance. Just exactly what it needed to be, and nothing more, which was, Danny had thought, extremely on brand. He'd replied, "Thank you for what you did. I won't waste it." George Strait had replied, "I know you won't." Reed Colton appeared at Danny's elbow. 2 minutes, he said. Danny nodded. 120 seats, Reed said. Full house, I know, including. Reed glanced out toward the room. A gentleman from Capital Nashville in the back left corner. Don't look for him, just know he's there. Danny looked at Reed. Should that change anything about how I play? Reed considered this, then, no, he said. That's probably why I shouldn't have told you. I'll pretend you didn't. Good instinct. Danny looked out at the edge of the stage, the point where the wing ended and the lights began. The specific threshold he'd thought about for a long time, in different ways, and which was now simply a physical location he was about to walk through. You ready? Reed said. Danny thought about the question the way George Strait had asked it the first night, yes or no. That's all it is. And felt the answer the same way. not as a performance of confidence, but as a fact, arrived at through the specific long work of getting here. "Yeah," he said, "I am." He walked out onto the stage. The applause when he appeared was warm, immediate, not the explosive recognition of a star entering, but the genuine welcome of people who had come specifically for this and were glad it was starting. He settled at the microphone, adjusted it, looked out at the room. In the front row, Tyler Calloway sat up straight in his seat with his hands on his knees, not trying to look cool, not performing nonchalance. Just looking at his father with the specific open attention of someone who is fully present for something that matters to them. Danny looked at his son for one moment. Then he looked out at the room, at the 120 people, at the warm light, at the space between the stage and the seats. That was the specific distance across which a true thing has to travel to become shared. "My name's Danny Calloway," he said into the microphone. "I'm a waiter. I'm a dad. And apparently I'm a musician now too." A brief pause. Took me a while to get the order right. The room laughed. A real laugh, the kind that relaxes a room into itself, that makes people lean back in their seats and stop holding whatever they'd been holding at the door. Danny put his fingers on the strings. He thought of his father. He played. The signal comes back in on a song you used to know, and you remember why you started, and you remember where you're going. And the 30 miles of nothing start to feel like part of the road.